Alright guys, so now that your quiz is over, we've got a couple more lessons to do, one of which is about quadrilaterals. Now, this is something that you would have learned back in 4th grade, but my guess is it's probably been a while. So I have something short to show you first that's not actually in your SAB, but still have your SAB nearby because we'll eventually get there, okay? So this is just a picture that I grabbed from the internet that kind of reminds you of your four-sided shapes, which are called quadrilaterals. So a quadrilateral is not a very specific name because once you figure out that a shape has 4 sides, there's probably more to it than that. So you can call any four-sided shape a quadrilateral. However, there are many more names that are more specific to that special kind of quadrilateral. So, for example, I want you to look with me through this first one, which is a parallelogram. So parallelogram is exactly in the word. It says that it's got parallel lines, okay? So it says over here, your opposite sides are equal and they are parallel, and your opposite angles are equal, but we're not worried too much about angles today. So that's telling you that this side is parallel to this side, and that this side is parallel to this side. Now these two sides, since they're parallel, these two sides have to be the same length, and these two sides have to be the same length. So one kind of quadrilateral is a parallelogram. Well, there's actually quite a few different kinds of parallelogram. So for example, a rhombus is a parallelogram, a rectangle is a parallelogram, a square is also a parallelogram. They're just parallelograms with more specific names. So let's look at some of those. So a rhombus is a kind of parallelogram that says your opposite sides are parallel and all of your sides are equal. But this drawing made me laugh because I don't actually think that those sides look very equal. So for example, the way that you could draw a rhombus would be something like, I don't actually have a good drawing tool for that. So you'll just have to use your imagination here. If I were to take this line and I were to repeat it a whole bunch of times, I could then make you a rhombus. I'm just gonna freehand it, guys. You're just gonna have to deal with it. So a rhombus is one, oh, that doesn't look like a rhombus. A rhombus is one where all 4 sides are equal, but it doesn't necessarily all equal, or that they don't necessarily have perfect 90-degree angles. Now, something else to notice about a rhombus, you have probably heard it called a diamond in the past, which is a perfectly acceptable name. That's totally fine. Okay, so let me erase some of that work because that wasn't a great job. Okay, go away. How about over there? Okay, you're in the corner. Okay, so a rhombus is, more importantly, is that all of its sides are equal, even though that picture isn't the perfect example of that. Now, the next one after that is a rectangle, and a rectangle you can definitely recognize, but it's still got those opposite sides that are parallel. And then more importantly than that, what makes something a rectangle is that it has these perfect 4 90-degree angles. It has to have that. A rhombus doesn't have to have 90-degree angles, but a rectangle does. Okay, so the thing that makes it a rectangle is that each angle is a right angle. But then we have a square, and a square kind of does it all. So a square has 2 sets of opposite sides. It's got 4 90-degree angles, and its opposite sides are the same length. So it's like a rhombus, and it's also like a rectangle. It's like a rhombus because its opposite sides are equal, and it's like a rectangle because it has 4 90-degree angles. I'm not going to have you worry about a kite today, but the other big one to know is a trapezoid. A trapezoid is basically, it's not a parallelogram because a trapezoid only has 1 set of parallel sides, not 2. And so then it could look something kind of like that. You can also have a right trapezoid, which makes a right angle. It actually makes 2 right angles, but then it's not, these are still your only set of parallel sides right there. It doesn't have 2. So it's still a trapezoid. It's just called a right trapezoid. So that being said, there's 2 pages in here that we're going to skip for right now. We'll see if I have time at the end of my video to do some of those. So I want you to skip questions 1 through 10 for just a little bit. We'll come back to them eventually. But what we're actually going to do is we're going to try to do this classification activity. So when you classify a quadrilateral, it's reminding you that it's a closed shape and it's got 4 straight sides. And then from there, it wants to remind you that you could name it something a little bit more specific. So I have this right next to each other. If you want to pause real quick, there's a page in your SAB journal nearby that is exactly this. You might want to have it in handy. It's totally fine. You can also just use my page to help us out a little bit. So the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to actually write some of these definitions first before we then try to plop the letters in there. So, sorry for the page turn. So we're going to try to write down these definitions. Let me get a thinner pen. So a parallelogram is a quadrilateral with what? It's basically just got two sets of parallel sides. Make sure you write these with me, please. Two sets of parallel sides. Okay, so let's come over here to the right. A trapezoid is a quadrilateral with one set of parallel sides. Now here's something that I want you to notice in your drawing, and I'll give you time. Sorry, I'm going fast. You can always pause if I talk too fast. Keep that in mind. So a quadrilateral is offshooting to a parallelogram and then a trapezoid. But I want you to notice this. Your trapezoid stops right there, but look at your parallelogram. It keeps going. So that's something to remember. You have a bunch of quadrilaterals that have two sets of parallel sides, but you only have one quadrilateral that has one set of parallel sides. So they're a little bit different from each other. Okay, let me get back to my pen. Okay, so a rectangle is a parallelogram that also has, and I want you to notice that now it's not calling it a quadrilateral, it's calling it a parallelogram. And that's because it's telling you that it has two sets of parallel sides. So what else does a rectangle have? It has four 90-degree angles. And if we keep going from over to the right, a rhombus is a parallelogram with what? Well, a rhombus has four equal sides. Another word for equal, by the way, is congruent. You don't have to write it down, but I may say that later on, and I just want to remind you that congruent means equal. Now the last two is actually with a square, but it's just telling you how a square takes a shape one step further. So a square is a rectangle, but then what else does it have? A square is basically a rectangle with those four equal sides. So it's taking a rectangle and basically shrinking it down so it has four equal sides. And then a square could also be a rhombus, but it's a rhombus with four 90-degree angles. So it's the part of a rectangle and a rhombus that we're missing is what makes it a square. So now, our next job, and again, if you haven't written all of those down, make sure you pause the video so I can see, or so that you have it done. So basically our job is to label all of these quadrilaterals where they belong. And it made me laugh when I looked at my answer key earlier. It physically wrote down all the letters, but it's telling you that these are all quadrilaterals. So rather than writing down all the letters, I want you to write down that A through T are all technically quadrilaterals, okay? But we are going to have some that are more specific than that, so let's try to look around. So now, if I look at letter A, I see no parallel sides, so I know that I am all done with A. But let's look at B. B, to me, I notice a couple of things, and I want to show you what these little hash mark means. These hash marks mean that your opposite sides are the same length. So this is telling me that I have four equal sides. It's also telling me that I have four 90-degree angles, and it's also telling me that I have two sets, well, it's not telling me, but it's showing me that I have two sets of parallel sides. So here's the crazy thing. That tells me that pretty much everything in here is partially a square because it's got two sets of equal sides, it's got four 90-degree angles, and it also has four equal sides, four 90-degree angles, and two sets of parallel sides. It also is a rhombus. It's just more specific than that. It is not a trapezoid, though, because it doesn't only have one set of parallel sides. So I'm now done filling out for B. So basically, if you find a square is going to fit everywhere. If you find a rectangle, it's also going to fit under parallelogram, but it might not fit under square. If you find a rhombus, it will definitely fit under parallelogram, and it might possibly fit under square. That's kind of what we're working with here. Okay, let me go a little faster now because I'm worried about time. So letter C, I can tell right away, has these two sides that are the same length. So you can see that those two are the same, and then these two hash marks show that those two are the same. So they're not all the same length. So it's definitely not a rhombus because it doesn't have 4 equal sides. But this is for sure a parallelogram, so I'm going to put a C there. But then, because it doesn't have 90-degree angles, I can also tell that it's not a rectangle. So the letter C only fits right there. That's the only other thing that it is. I'm only crossing them out once I'm done with them. Okay, letter D, just by looking at it, it looks like a rectangle, but let's be sure. These two sides are the same length, and these two sides are the same length, but they're not all the same. And it's also got 4 90-degree angles, so that tells me that this is indeed a rectangle, but it's not a rhombus, because it doesn't have all equal sides, and it's not a square. So that means that it's going to fit under a rectangle, but it's also going to fit under parallelogram. Okay, let's look at E. So E shows me that all 4 of my sides are the same length, which is great. And I see here that these are 2 sets of parallel sides if I were to draw those out. So E is going to be a parallelogram and E is going to be a rhombus. But the last thing I need to check for is to see if it's a square. But there are no 90-degree angles. So because of that, that's it. That's where I will stop. Okay. Letter F is a funky one. I see no parallel sides. So because of that, it would only be a quadrilateral. And I already wrote that one down. So I can go ahead and move on. And let's try G. So G is a funky one. G is actually that kite shape that I told you about earlier, but let's check on it. So basically what's going on with G is that I have 2 sides that are the same. So these 2 sides are the same, but they're not opposite each other. And then these 2 sides are the same, but they're also not opposite each other. So because of that, there's no parallel sides. So since there are no parallel sides, it is simply a quadrilateral. If I had told you kite, it would be under there for kite. Okay, letter H is a little funky. I see that these 2 sides are parallel, but this one looks a little too tilted. So I think this one only has 1 set of parallel sides. So because of that, we would call that a trapezoid. Okay, guys, I got to move a little faster. Okay, so letter I is a rectangle. It is also a parallelogram. Letter J is nothing. It's too funky. Well, it's not nothing. It's a quadrilateral. Letter K, I see some 90-degree angles there, which is good, but K doesn't seem to have anything that's parallel, so that's not going to be anything more than a quadrilateral. Letter L is showing me that all 4 sides of these are the same length, so that would mean that this is a rhombus, because I also see 2 sets of parallel sides. But there's no 90-degree angles, so a rhombus and a parallelogram is all that guy is. And then M, again, you've got a 90-degree angle, but nothing parallel, so that's it. It's just a quadrilateral. N has a convex shape, which we'll talk about tomorrow, so that's nothing except for a quadrilateral. O is, it's got 1 set of parallel sides, so O is a trapezoid. P is also a trapezoid. That's that one that I was telling you about that's called a right triangle. Or sorry, a right trapezoid. Letter Q, it's got 3 sides that are the same length, but not a 4th side that's the same. So this one's nothing but a quadrilateral. And then R is definitely a square that's just been tilted. It's got all 4 sides that are the same length. It's got 4 90-degree angles, and it's got 2 sets of parallel sides. So this is going to be R, this would be R, this would be R, and this one will be R. And then finally S is totally, it's got 2 opposite sides that are the same, which would make it a parallelogram. And it also means then that it might be a rectangle, however it has no 90-degree angles, so that's just a parallelogram. And then finally letter T is again another example of a trapezoid. Okay. For the interest of time, I would love it if you went back. I would really, really love it, but you don't have to. I would love it if you went back to questions 1 through 10 to try those out for your practice today, but it's up to you. Your other option is your homework and remembering pages. Those might be hard, though, if you don't go back and do 1 through 10, so you can also try out some IXL lessons to show me your work, okay? A good reminder of how to classify quadrilaterals, and again, I really, really hope you choose this option today.